My brother-in-law borrowed my truck and totaled it while drunk driving. The civil suit for damages sobered him up fast. Getting married into a family means accepting all their baggage, and my wife's brother was definitely part of that package. He had this habit of treating everyone around him like his personal lending library, always asking to borrow things and never quite returning them in the same condition. My truck was my pride and joy, a 2019 Ford F-150 that I'd saved up for years to buy outright, no payments hanging over my head. The night it happened started like any other weekend. We were having a family barbecue at my mother-in-law's house, and everyone was there including him. He'd been drinking steadily since noon, switching between beer and whiskey like he was trying to set some kind of record. I watched him stumble around the backyard, getting louder and more obnoxious with each drink, but nobody seemed to care enough to cut him off. Around 10 at night, he cornered me near the grill where I was cleaning up. His breath reeked of alcohol and his eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. He started going on about how he needed to get home because he had some early morning commitment the next day. I suggested he call a ride or ask someone sober to drive him, but he brushed off every suggestion like it was beneath him. Then he asked for my keys. Just like that, casual as asking for a napkin. I told him absolutely not, that he was way too drunk to drive anything, let alone my truck. He got defensive immediately, raising his voice and claiming he was fine to drive. The whole family turned to look at us, and I could feel the tension building like a storm cloud. My wife came over and tried to mediate, suggesting he sleep on the couch for the night. Her mom offered to let him stay in his old room upstairs. But he kept insisting he needed to get home, getting more agitated by the minute. He started accusing me of being controlling and treating him like a child, which struck me as ironic given his behavior. The argument escalated until he stormed off toward the street, muttering about walking home. It was a 15-mile trek through some pretty sketchy neighborhoods, and despite everything, I felt guilty about letting him stumble into the night. My wife was practically begging me to do something, worried about her brother's safety. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let him take the truck. But I made him promise to drive straight home and leave the keys in the mailbox for me to pick up in the morning. He nodded eagerly, suddenly all smiles and gratitude, like he'd won some kind of victory. I handed over my keys with a sick feeling in my stomach. The call came at 3 in the morning. A police officer on the other end, asking if I owned a specific truck by the license plate number. My heart sank as he explained that my vehicle had been involved in a serious accident. The driver had been arrested for drunk driving and was currently in the hospital with minor injuries. I threw on clothes and drove to the scene with my wife. What I saw made my stomach turn. My beautiful truck was wrapped around a telephone pole, the entire front end crumpled like an accordion. The pole was snapped in half, power lines were down across the road, and emergency crews were still working to clear the debris. The officer explained that my brother-in-law had been speeding through a residential area when he lost control. He jumped the curb, taken out a fire hydrant, clipped two parked cars, and finally slammed into the pole. The impact had been so severe that the utility company estimated thousands of dollars in infrastructure damage. Miraculously, nobody else was seriously hurt. The two parked cars belonged to neighbors who came out in their pajamas to survey the damage. One was a young couple with a newborn baby, and their car was their only means of transportation. The other belonged to an elderly man who relied on his vehicle for medical appointments. At the hospital, I found my brother-in-law in surprisingly good shape, considering the destruction he'd caused. He had some cuts and bruises, a mild concussion, and was hooked up to an IV for dehydration. When he saw me, he actually had the nerve to complain about how uncomfortable the hospital bed was. He showed no remorse whatsoever for what had happened. Instead, he launched into excuses about how the road was poorly lit and the truck's brakes felt spongy. He even suggested that maybe I should have warned him about some imaginary mechanical issue. I stood there listening to him blame everyone and everything except his own reckless decision to drive drunk. The police report painted a clear picture of his negligence. His blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit. Multiple witnesses confirmed he'd been driving erratically before the crash. Security footage from a nearby convenience store showed him swerving across lane lines and running a red light just minutes before the accident. My insurance company delivered the bad news a few days later. They would cover the truck's value, but I'd be responsible for the deductible. However, they explained that since the driver wasn't authorized and was intoxicated, they might pursue subrogation against him for the full amount they paid out. The utility company sent me a bill for $47,000 in damages. The telephone pole, power lines, transformer, and emergency response costs added up to a staggering amount. My insurance didn't cover infrastructure damage caused by unauthorized drivers, leaving me potentially responsible for the entire sum. The two car owners whose vehicles were damaged also came after me for compensation. Their insurance companies were seeking reimbursement for repairs, rental cars, and other expenses. Suddenly, I was looking at potential liability that could easily exceed $100,000. I tried talking to my brother-in-law about taking responsibility for the financial mess he'd created. He listened with this blank expression, like I was speaking a foreign language. Then he had the audacity to suggest that since it was technically my truck, the whole situation was really my problem to solve. His attitude pushed me over the edge. I'd been patient with his drinking, his borrowing, his general irresponsibility for years. But watching him try to walk away from the consequences of nearly killing someone while driving my vehicle was the final straw. I realized that being family didn't give him the right to destroy my life. I hired the best personal injury attorney I could find. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit against my brother-in-law for all damages related to the accident. The suit included my truck's value, my insurance deductible, the utility company's bill, the damaged cars, and punitive damages for his reckless behavior. The legal papers were served at his apartment on a Tuesday morning. My wife got a hysterical phone call from him within hours, demanding to know why I was suing him. He kept insisting that family doesn't sue family, that we should work this out privately. I told him I'd tried that approach, and he'd made it clear he wasn't interested in taking responsibility. His tune changed dramatically when his own attorney explained the seriousness of his situation. The drunk driving charge was just the beginning. He was facing potential jail time, massive fines, loss of his license, and now a civil lawsuit that could bankrupt him. The reality of his actions finally started to sink in. The first major breakthrough came when the utility company's investigation revealed additional negligence. They found that my brother-in-law had been texting while driving, based on phone records pulled by the police. This evidence of distracted driving on top of drunk driving strengthened our case significantly. Then came the surprise that nobody saw coming. During the discovery phase, my attorney uncovered something that changed everything. My brother-in-law had been driving on a suspended license for the past 6 months. He'd accumulated so many traffic violations that the state had revoked his driving privileges, but he'd never told anyone in the family. This revelation opened up a whole new avenue of liability. Not only had he been drunk and distracted, but he'd been driving illegally in the first place. The insurance implications were staggering. Every policy involved could potentially deny coverage based on his unlicensed status. The case took an unexpected turn when security footage from a nearby business captured something the police had missed. The video showed my brother-in-law stopping at a bar just 2 blocks from the accident scene. He'd left my truck running in the parking lot while he went inside for what witnesses described as several more drinks. This evidence proved that he'd made a conscious decision to continue drinking after taking my truck. It wasn't just poor judgment or an accident of circumstance. He deliberately consumed more alcohol while in possession of my vehicle, knowing full well he'd have to drive home. The bar's involvement added another layer of complexity to the case. They'd served alcohol to someone who was visibly intoxicated, which violated state laws about overserving patrons. My attorney suggested adding them as defendants, which could significantly increase the potential recovery. As the case developed, more details emerged about my brother-in-law's drinking habits. Medical records subpoenaed during discovery showed multiple previous incidents of alcohol-related problems. He'd been to the emergency room twice in the past year for alcohol poisoning. His primary care doctor had recommended addiction treatment, which he'd refused. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted a picture of someone in complete denial about his drinking problem. The examiner noted his inability to accept responsibility for his actions and his tendency to blame external factors for his poor choices. These findings supported our claim for punitive damages. Meanwhile, the financial pressure was mounting on my brother-in-law. His employer had suspended him pending resolution of the criminal charges. His apartment complex was threatening eviction due to the negative publicity from the accident. His car insurance company had dropped him entirely, making it impossible for him to legally drive even if he got his license back. The depositions were particularly revealing. Under oath, my brother-in-law struggled to maintain his narrative of innocence. When confronted with evidence of his drinking, texting, and illegal driving, he became increasingly defensive and contradictory. His attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as the testimony continued. The breakthrough moment came during a settlement conference. My brother-in-law's attorney had advised him to accept a structured payment plan that would cover all damages over time. But when the judge explained the terms, something finally clicked. He broke down completely, admitting for the first time that he had a serious drinking problem. The settlement negotiations revealed just how deeply his addiction had affected his life. He'd been hiding the extent of his drinking from everyone, including his family. The accident had forced him to confront the reality that he could have killed someone, and the weight of that possibility finally broke through his denial. The final settlement was more comprehensive than I'd originally hoped for. He agreed to pay full restitution for all damages, including my truck, the utility repairs, and the other cars. The payment plan included interest and was secured by a lien on his future earnings. He also agreed to complete a year-long residential treatment program. The most surprising part was his complete transformation after accepting responsibility. He voluntarily entered treatment before the settlement was finalized, recognizing that his drinking had spiraled completely out of control. The program helped him understand how his addiction had affected everyone around him, not just himself. His recovery became a family healing process. My wife had been carrying guilt about her brother's behavior for years, feeling somehow responsible for his actions. Seeing him finally take accountability lifted a burden from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The restitution payments became a monthly reminder of the consequences of his choices. But instead of resenting them, he told me they helped him stay motivated in his recovery. Each payment was a tangible way of making amends for the damage he'd caused. The criminal case resulted in a plea agreement that included jail time, probation, and mandatory participation in an ongoing treatment program. His driver's license was suspended for 3 years, and he'd have to complete additional requirements before getting it back. The consequences were severe, but they provided the structure he needed to maintain his sobriety. 2 years later, he's maintained his sobriety and has been making regular payments on the settlement. He found work in a field that doesn't require driving, and he's rebuilt his life around his recovery. The brother-in-law who once felt entitled to borrow anything he wanted has been replaced by someone who understands the value of personal responsibility. The accident taught our entire family about the importance of setting boundaries. My wife learned that enabling her brother's behavior hadn't been helping him. It had been preventing him from facing the consequences he needed to change. Her mother stopped making excuses for his drinking and started supporting his recovery instead. Looking back, I realized that lending him my truck that night was the catalyst for changes that probably saved his life. If he'd continued down the path he was on, eventually he would have killed someone or himself. The lawsuit wasn't just about recovering damages. It was about forcing him to confront a problem that everyone had been afraid to address. The financial recovery took time, but the emotional recovery was even more complex. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions rather than promises. Family gatherings that had once been tense affairs became opportunities for genuine connection, as he worked to make amends for years of problematic behavior. The experience changed my perspective on family loyalty. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. Holding him accountable through the legal system was more helpful than years of family interventions and emotional appeals had been. Today, my brother-in-law drives a modest used car that he saved up to buy himself. He's never asked to borrow my vehicle again, and I wouldn't hesitate to let him if he did. The man who totaled my truck while drunk is gone, replaced by someone who understands the weight of personal responsibility and the fragility of the trust that holds families together.